Picture this. A man works hard his entire life, serves his country, raises his family with discipline and pride. All he wants is peace and a place to breathe. But instead of being welcomed, he's handed a letter that makes him feel like he doesn't belong. That's exactly what happened to Reginald Holt in a quiet suburb of northern Georgia. Reginald was 44, an Army veteran who had spent most of his adult life following rules, carrying responsibility, and taking care of others. After leaving the service, he bought a 2-story brick home in a community outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, just across the state line. He thought it was perfect, close enough to the city for his wife to commute to work, far enough out that the woods still whispered their old lessons. Those woods were his refuge. Every Saturday morning, he'd wake his teenage son, Caleb Holt, before the sun had fully climbed up. The two of them would load the truck with their rifles, orange safety vests, and thermoses of coffee and hot chocolate. Hunting wasn't just a sport to Reginald. It was tradition. His father had taught him. Now he was teaching Caleb. The stillness, the patience, the respect for every step you took on the earth. This was how he passed down discipline. One chilly morning in late November, after a successful hunt, Reginald and Caleb carried home their gear, still laughing about Caleb's near miss on a deer. That's when he noticed an envelope wedged in his mailbox. Thick white paper, the HOA's crest printed on the corner. He didn't think much of it, until he opened it. "Dear Mr. Holt," it began. Then came the words that felt like a punch. "Your recent activities in the adjoining woodland area have been deemed unsafe and inappropriate for our community. The discharge of firearms in close proximity to homes endangers residents and undermines the character of our neighborhood. Effective immediately, you are fined $1,500. Signed at the bottom, Patricia Alden, HOA President. Reginald read it twice, then a third time. His chest tightened. Unsafe? Inappropriate. He'd hunted far from any home, on legal ground, with every permit in order. His father's old words echoed in his head. A man doesn't break rules he respects. And he had respected every single one. "Dad?" Caleb asked quietly, watching his father's jaw set. "What's it say?" Reginald handed him the paper. Caleb scanned it, his face falling. "They can't do this," he muttered. "You weren't anywhere near the houses." Reginald exhaled, long and steady. "It's not about rules, son. It's about perception." That night at dinner, his wife, Lorraine Holt, noticed the tension immediately. "What happened?" she asked. Reginald slid the letter across the table. Lorraine read it slowly, her eyes narrowing with each line. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "What about the Whitakers down the road? I've seen them shoot targets in their yard. Nobody fined them." "Exactly," Reginald replied. His voice was low, almost calm, but inside, anger pressed hard against his ribs. The next day he called Patricia. Her voice on the other end was clipped, controlled. "Mr. Holt, I assume you've received the notice?" "I have," Reginald said. "But I need clarification. I was hunting on permitted land, following every guideline. How does that endanger anyone here? You discharged firearms within earshot of our residence. Children were playing outside. People were disturbed. This is a community, Mr. Holt. We value safety and image." "I did nothing illegal," Reginald said firmly. "Legal or not, it disrupts the peace," Patricia replied. "And the fine stands." Reginald sat in silence for a moment, gripping the phone. Finally he said, "Then I guess I'll see you at the next board meeting." But the truth was, he already knew how those meetings went. He'd seen it before. Neighbors whispering, rules bent for some, tightened for others. He wasn't about to beg for understanding in a room where the deck was already stacked. That night, as he sat on the porch staring out at the tree line, Caleb joined him. "Dad, are we going to stop hunting?" Reginald shook his head. "No, son. We don't stop doing what's right just because someone says it looks wrong." The woods loomed in the distance, dark but familiar. And that's when the thought sparked. If the HOA wanted to make those woods their excuse, maybe it was time he changed the rules of the game. But Reginald had no idea that one fine would lead to a decision that would turn the entire neighborhood against him. The following Saturday morning, Reginald loaded his truck like usual. But instead of driving into the woods, he sat behind the wheel with the engine off, staring at the steering wheel. Caleb climbed in beside him, confused. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah," Reginald said, though his voice was heavy. "We're not going out there today, not yet." Caleb frowned. "Because of the HOA?" Reginald tapped his fingers against the wheel. "No, because I've been thinking. Sometimes fighting people on their terms is a waste. You change the ground they're standing on, and suddenly everything looks different." Caleb didn't fully understand, but he nodded. That afternoon, Reginald made a call. The name he dialed was an old one. Arthur Macmillan. Arthur owned the woodland parcel that hugged the subdivision's boundary. He was in his late 70s, a man whose family had held that land for generations. To most in the neighborhood, Arthur was invisible. To Reginald, he was the key. The two men met at a diner off Highway 41, the kind with coffee that tasted like tar and waitresses who knew everyone by first name. Arthur arrived in a worn flannel shirt and boots older than Caleb. "Your Holt?" Arthur asked, extending a hand roughened by years of farm work. "Yes, sir. Appreciate you meeting me." Arthur leaned back in the booth, eyes sharp despite his age. "So, what's a fellow like you want with my woods?" Reginald didn't dance around it. "I want to buy them." Arthur raised a bushy eyebrow. "You know how many folks have asked me that over the years. Developers, real estate agents, the HOA itself. I told them all, no, I'm not looking to build." Reginald said quickly. "I just want the land. For me and my son. For hunting, hiking, peace. Nothing more." Arthur studied him for a long time, sipping his coffee. "And what makes you think I'll sell to you? Because I'll respect it," Reginald replied. His voice carried the weight of conviction. "And because I'll make sure it's taken care of long after you're gone." Arthur didn't answer right away, but something in his eyes softened. He glanced out the diner window, as though picturing the woods in his mind. "My kids don't want it," he finally muttered. "They've been pushing me to cash out. Maybe it's time." The two men talked for hours. By the end, Arthur agreed to consider an offer. When Reginald returned home, Lorraine was waiting in the kitchen. "What did you do today?" she asked, eyeing him suspiciously. He poured himself a glass of water before answering. "Started working on a solution." "What kind of solution?" "The kind that makes this fine look like pocket change." Lorraine sighed. "Reg, I know you. Don't let pride get the best of you. This fight with Patricia, it could make our lives harder." Reginald looked her in the eye. "It's not pride. It's principle. If they think I don't belong, then maybe it's time to remind them whose rules actually matter." Over the next several weeks, negotiations with Arthur moved slowly. There were lawyers, contracts, surveys of the property. Reginald kept most of it quiet, not even telling Caleb the full details until the deal was nearly done. When the papers were finally signed, Reginald held the deed in his hand like it was a weapon. Not one meant to destroy, but to defend. The first sign went up the following weekend at the trailhead, where kids usually gathered with bikes and dogs. Private property. No trespassing. By Sunday evening, there were 5 more signs nailed to trees around the perimeter. The reaction was immediate. Neighbors stopped him at the grocery store, demanding answers. A man named Victor Crane, who liked to jog the trails every morning, cornered him near the frozen foods aisle. "You can't just close it off. Those trails are for everyone." Reginald didn't raise his voice. "Not anymore. I own the land now." Victor sputtered, face red. "This is outrageous." "No," Reginald said evenly. "What was outrageous was fining me for using land legally. Now it's mine, and I decide." Word spread fast. By Monday, Patricia called him. Her tone was sharper than before. "Mr. Holt, I've received numerous complaints. The community is very upset." "I'm sure they are," Reginald replied. "But the land is no longer theirs to use. It's mine. This creates hostility, Reginald. It divides neighbors. Don't you want to be part of this community?" Reginald paused, then answered, "Respect builds community, not one-sided rules." There was silence on the line before Patricia spoke again, her voice colder. "We'll see how long this lasts." Reginald hung up and leaned back in his chair. For the first time since receiving that letter, he felt a measure of control. But control often comes at a cost. But what Reginald didn't realize was that the true fight with his neighbors and with Patricia was only just beginning. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to split right down the middle. Some residents were furious about the trail closures, while a quieter few respected Reginald's decision. But the loudest voices, as always, were the angriest. By the second week, anonymous notes started appearing in Reginald's mailbox. Some were polite, almost pleading. "Please reconsider. Our kids loved those trails." Others dripped with hostility. "Selfish. You don't belong here." One note didn't even bother with words, just a crude drawing of a locked gate with X's over it. Lorraine found one of the letters tossed on the kitchen counter and shook her head. "Reggie, this is getting ugly." "It was already ugly," he replied, folding his arms. "Now it's just out in the open." One evening, Reginald and Caleb were unloading groceries when a neighbor, Diane Pruitt, approached them. She was in her late 50s, known for walking her golden retriever along the trails every morning. Her face was flushed with frustration. "Reginald," she said, crossing her arms tightly, "I've lived here 20 years. Those woods are part of this neighborhood. People feel safe there. Kids explore. Dogs run free. Now it's all gone." Reginald kept his voice calm. "It's not gone. It's just private now. I didn't buy it to spite anyone. I bought it because I was being punished for using it legally." Diane's eyes flashed. "This isn't fair to the rest of us." "Neither was that fine," Reginald said evenly. "If Patricia hadn't pushed it, we wouldn't be here." Caleb shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his father. Diane huffed, muttered something under her breath, and stormed off. The confrontation rattled Lorraine more than it did Reginald. That night, she sat him down at the kitchen table. "This is going to make you a target," she said quietly. Reginald looked at her. "Maybe. But sometimes standing up for yourself makes you one." Meanwhile, Patricia was stirring the pot. At the next HOA meeting, she addressed the crowd in the clubhouse, standing beneath the fluorescent lights with a tight smile. "This community was built on unity," she began, "on shared spaces and mutual respect. Unfortunately, one resident has chosen to put his own interests above everyone else's. He has taken land that families enjoyed for decades and closed it off." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded along, others looked uneasy. Patricia raised her voice slightly. "We cannot allow one individual to dictate the future of our neighborhood. If we let this stand, what's next? Fences cutting through our streets, locked gates at every corner. We must hold the line." From the back of the room, Victor Crane shouted, "So what do we do?" Patricia's smile sharpened. "We pressure, we petition, and if necessary, we litigate." Back at home, Caleb was scrolling on his phone when he looked up, eyes wide. "Dad, they're talking about you on the neighborhood page. People are saying you bought the woods just to be vindictive." Reginald frowned. "And do you believe that?" Caleb shook his head. "No, but they're making it sound like you're the villain." Reginald sighed deeply. "Son, when you stand your ground, people will always try to paint you that way. The question is, do you cave in, or do you hold firm?" But holding firm grew harder as the days went by. One night, Reginald heard rustling outside. He grabbed a flashlight, stepped onto the porch, and found one of his signs torn down and tossed into the ditch. Another night, he woke to see headlights sweeping across his front yard as a car peeled off. Lorraine grew anxious. "What if this escalates?" she asked one morning, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "What if someone gets violent?" Reginald placed a hand over hers. "Then we deal with it, but we don't back down." Still, the tension weighed on him. Even at work, he found himself distracted, replaying Patricia's words in his head. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was a leader with influence. And influence can turn into power quickly. The breaking point came one Saturday when Reginald and Caleb were in the garage cleaning their rifles. A knock at the door startled them. It was Patricia herself, standing with her arms folded, wearing a blazer as if she'd come straight from a boardroom. "Mr. Holt," she said flatly, "we need to talk." Reginald stepped outside, closing the door behind him. "About what?" Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You're hurting this community. Closing those trails has caused outrage. People are angry. Families are upset. I'm asking you, one last time, to reopen them." Reginald held her gaze. "And if I don't?" Her lips curled slightly. Then we'll make things very uncomfortable for you here. This isn't the kind of neighborhood where you want enemies." Reginald's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "I served overseas for 15 years. I've faced worse than angry neighbors with petitions. You think I'm going to fold because you say so? No, Patricia. Respect goes both ways. I won't be the only one to give it." Patricia didn't flinch. She simply smiled, cold and sharp, before walking back to her car. Caleb, who had been peeking through the blinds, whispered when his father came back inside. "She looked serious." "She is serious," Reginald said quietly. "But so am I." But Patricia's warning wasn't just words. It was the beginning of a campaign that would test Reginald's patience, his family's peace, and the very idea of what it meant to stand your ground. By mid-December, the air in the neighborhood felt different. People waved less, conversations cut short when Reginald walked by, and kids who once played basketball in his driveway now kept their distance. Patricia's campaign had done its job. He was no longer just another resident. He was the man who took away the trails. At first it was small things. Lorraine noticed trash left at the end of their driveway. Fast food bags, crushed cans, nothing dramatic but deliberate. Caleb mentioned whispers at school, kids saying his dad was selfish or crazy. Reginald brushed it off, but Lorraine saw the weight in his shoulders. Then came the petition. A neatly printed stack of papers began circulating around the subdivision. "We, the undersigned, request that Mr. Holt reopen access to the woodland trails for community use." By the time Reginald heard about it, over 70 households had signed. He read the copy someone slipped into his mailbox, lips pressed tight. "They think signatures change ownership?" he muttered. Caleb, sitting at the table, asked, "What are you going to do?" Reginald leaned back in his chair. "Same thing I've been doing. Hold the line." But holding the line wasn't easy. That weekend, while repairing the fence at the property's edge, Reginald found 2 teenagers slipping through the trees with backpacks. He called out, "Hey, you're trespassing!" The boys froze, then turned, smirks plastered across their faces. One of them, tall and lanky, said, "We've been walking here since we were kids. You can't stop us." Reginald's voice stayed calm but firm. "Yes, I can. This is my land now. Turn around." The boys muttered insults as they trudged away. Caleb, who had been holding a hammer, shook his head. "They don't care, Dad." "They'll care when the sheriff shows up next time," Reginald said. Word spread quickly that Reginald was patrolling the land. Patricia used it at the next HOA meeting. Standing before the crowd, she declared, "Our neighbor is threatening children for walking on land they've always enjoyed. This is not the behavior of someone who values community." From the back, a few voices called out in agreement, but others stayed silent, uncomfortable. Even those angry about the trails weren't sure about painting Reginald as a villain. Meanwhile, Lorraine grew restless. One night, as they sat in the living room, she spoke up. "Reg, how far are you going to take this? Patricia's not going to stop. She's turning people against us." Reginald rubbed his forehead. "If I back down now, it tells them I never had the right to begin with. That I was wrong to stand up." "And if you don't?" she asked. "What happens when this explodes?" Her words hung heavy. For a moment, Reginald didn't answer. The explosion came sooner than expected. One morning, Reginald woke to find spray paint across the side of his shed. Large red letters spelled out, "Selfish land hoarder." Caleb discovered it first and called out, his voice shaking with anger. Reginald stared at the vandalism in silence before finally saying, "Go get me the paint. We'll cover it up." "But Dad," Caleb started. "Now," Reginald said firmly. They painted over the words together, the silence between them thick. Lorraine watched from the porch, worry etched into her face. That evening, Reginald filed a police report, though he doubted much would come of it. The officer who took his statement shrugged. "These things are hard to trace. Probably kids messing around." Reginald clenched his jaw. "It's more than that." But the officer just nodded, scribbled notes, and left. The next day, Patricia appeared again. She didn't knock. She waited at the edge of his driveway until he stepped outside. "Vandalism already?" she said with a false tone of sympathy. "That's what happens when people feel wronged." Reginald's eyes locked on hers. "Don't pretend you don't know you're fueling this." Her smile tightened. I simply represent the interests of the community. You represent your interests, he replied. And you've made it clear you don't care who gets hurt in the process. Patricia tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but sharp. You're making enemies, Reginald. I'd think carefully before pushing this any further. He didn't answer, just turned and walked back inside. Lorraine stood in the hallway, having overheard. She's not bluffing, she whispered. Reginald finally let out a breath he'd been holding. Neither am I. The tension seeped into every part of life. Grocery trips took longer because of stairs. Caleb stopped inviting friends over. Lorraine hesitated before opening the blinds at night. Yet Reginald held firm. Each morning, he checked the signs along the trail. Each evening, he sat on the porch watching the woods as though daring someone to challenge him. But Patricia wasn't finished. She was about to escalate in a way that would drag the entire neighborhood into open conflict. By January, the conflict had boiled over. Patricia called for a special session of the HOA, open to all residents. Word spread fast, and on a chilly Thursday evening, nearly every homeowner packed into the clubhouse. Folding chairs lined the walls, voices overlapped in anxious chatter, and the smell of burned coffee drifted from a percolator in the corner. Reginald arrived with Lorraine and Caleb. As soon as they walked in, the room quieted. Heads turned, whispers followed. Lorraine squeezed his arm. They're waiting for you to explode, she whispered. He nodded. Then I won't give them the satisfaction. Patricia stood at the front, papers in hand, her blazer sharp as if she were on trial. She tapped the microphone, clearing her throat. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, we need to address a matter that has fractured this community. One man's decision has taken away what many considered a shared space. The trails, the woods. Murmurs rose. Reginald stayed seated, jaw tight. Patricia continued, her eyes flicking toward him. While we respect private ownership, we must consider the greater good. Neighbors feel betrayed. Families feel punished. We have a choice. Will we let division define us, or will we act to restore unity? Victor Crane stood up. This has gone on long enough. I run those trails every morning. Now I have nowhere to go. He doesn't need all that land. Before Patricia could respond, another neighbor spoke. Linda Jarrett, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s. With all due respect, Victor, it's his property. He bought it. We can't just demand he give it back. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, some siding with Victor, others with Linda. Patricia raised her hand for silence. Order, please. We will all be heard. Reginald stood slowly, the chair legs scraping against the floor. The room hushed again. He held the microphone, his deep voice steady. When I moved here, I thought I was buying into a community of equals, people who respected each other. That letter, he held up the fine notice Patricia had signed, told me otherwise. I was fined for doing something legal, something I had every right to do. I watched others shoot targets in their backyards without consequence. The rules weren't applied equally. And I won't apologize for defending myself. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't about you personally, Mr. Holt. It's about how your actions affect everyone else. Reginald locked eyes with her. If it wasn't personal, my name wouldn't be on that fine. If it wasn't personal, the rules would have applied to everyone, not just me. I didn't take those trails to punish anyone. I bought them to protect my son and myself from bias. If that makes me selfish, so be it. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Diane Pruitt, the dog walker, stood up. Her voice trembled with emotion. My grandkids used to love those trails. Now they cry because they can't go there anymore. I don't care about HOA politics. I just want them to have what they had. Reginald softened. I hear you, Diane. But understand this. My son cried, too, when he watched his father punished for nothing more than teaching him what my father taught me. Respect has to go both ways. The room buzzed with tension. Patricia quickly seized the moment. Which is why the board is considering legal action. We are consulting with attorneys to determine whether the community has an easement, a right to continued access through long-term use. If such a right exists, the land may not be exclusively yours. Gasps rippled. Lorraine's hand gripped Reginald's arm tightly. He leaned into the microphone again. You can take me to court if you want. I've been through worse than courtrooms. But ask yourselves this: what message are you sending? That rules only matter when convenient? That a man who follows the law can still be punished because you don't like how it looks? That's not unity. That's hypocrisy. For a split second, a few people clapped before Patricia cut them off with a glare. The meeting dragged on, voices clashing, accusations thrown like stones. Some demanded compromise, others called Reginald stubborn, while a handful quietly admitted Patricia had gone too far. By the end, no resolution was reached. Patricia adjourned with a stiff smile, promising updates soon. As the crowd dispersed, Reginald gathered his family and walked to the car. Lorraine whispered, "They're not backing down." He slid into the driver's seat, eyes fixed straight ahead. "Neither am I." Caleb sat in the back, silent for most of the ride, until finally he asked, "Dad, what if they win in court?" Reginald glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Then we fight harder. Because, son, sometimes you don't choose the battles. The battles choose you." But Patricia wasn't relying only on courts. She had another strategy, one that would strike closer to home than Reginald ever expected. The morning after the meeting, the Holt family woke to find another surprise. On their front lawn, someone had planted wooden stakes with bright orange ribbons, as if marking off a construction site. Lorraine spotted them first when she went out for the newspaper. "Reginald!" she called, voice sharp. He hurried outside, squinting at the strange markers. "What the hell is this?" Caleb stepped out barefoot, rubbing his eyes. "Looks like survey stakes." Lorraine folded her arms tightly. "Please tell me they're not starting something without even telling us." Reginald knelt to pull one out of the ground. A tag dangled from it. "Property line dispute. Pending review." No company name, no phone number, just the message. Lorraine's face went pale. "They're trying to scare us." Reginald clenched the stake in his hand. "Or push us into a mistake." Later that day he called Arthur Macmillan, the former owner of the woods. Arthur's gravelly voice came through the receiver. "Survey stakes? That's nonsense. I sold you every inch of that land fair and square. They don't have a leg to stand on." "I figured," Reginald said. "But they're not playing fair. Patricia will drag this out however she can." Arthur chuckled darkly. "Then you hold fast. People like her bank on fear. Don't give her that satisfaction." Still, the tension deepened. Lorraine worried constantly. Caleb grew quieter, his usual teenage jokes dulled by the atmosphere in the house. Even Reginald, though he tried to hide it, felt the pressure mounting. Every walk to the mailbox felt like stepping onto a stage where the whole neighborhood watched. The worst came one Friday night. Just after midnight, Reginald woke to the sound of barking. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out back, his boots crunching against the frost. The beam of light cut through the trees. And there they were. Two figures, teenagers again, darting across the property with spray cans. "Hey!" Reginald barked. His voice thundered through the night. The boys froze. One dropped his can, metallic clatter breaking the silence. "You're trespassing," Reginald said firmly, approaching them. The taller one tried to sound tough. "We're just painting trees. It's no big deal." "It's my land," Reginald replied. "Leave, now." The shorter boy shifted nervously. "Come on, let's go." They bolted, disappearing into the shadows. Reginald found fresh graffiti scrawled across one of his signs. "Holt X enemy." When he came back inside, Lorraine was waiting in her robe. "Did you see them?" "Yeah," he muttered. "Kids. Just kids." "But kids don't spray hate like that unless someone feeds it to them," she said softly. Reginald sat heavily at the table. For the first time, his hands trembled. "Patricia's poisoning this whole place." The next morning, he reported the incident. The deputy listened, jotted notes, then said, "We'll keep an eye out." But Reginald caught the way the deputy's eyes slid away. Another brush-off. That evening, Patricia appeared again. This time not at his house, but on the neighborhood message board. She posted a lengthy statement. "Recent tensions have escalated to vandalism. While we condemn all acts of destruction, we must recognize the root of the problem, one resident's refusal to compromise. Until the trails are restored, unrest will continue." Dozens of comments followed. Some agreed. Others questioned whether stirring division was the answer. But the damage was done. Patricia had shifted blame directly onto Reginald. Lorraine slammed her phone down after reading it. "She's painting you as the cause of everything." Reginald's voice was low, steady. "Then it's time to remind her that actions have consequences." That weekend he invited Arthur over for coffee. Caleb listened from the hallway as the two men spoke. "I'm not backing down," Reginald told Arthur. "But I need to be smart. Patricia wants me angry. I can't give her that." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then don't fight her on her turf. Make her fight on yours. She wants this to be about community. Make it about the law. That's something she can't twist." Reginald leaned back, considering. The old soldier in him stirred. Strategy, patience, discipline. This wasn't about winning a shouting match anymore. It was about surviving the long game. When Arthur left, Caleb finally spoke. "Dad, do you ever regret buying the land?" Reginald turned to him, eyes softening. "No. I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret standing up. If I teach you anything, it's that respect isn't given freely. You demand it by how you live, even when it costs you." Caleb nodded slowly, absorbing the words. That night, as Reginald stood at the edge of his property, the cold air cutting across his face, he tightened his grip on the flashlight. Patricia had crossed a line, dragging the whole neighborhood into her fight. And if she wanted a war of attrition, she was about to get one. But the war Patricia was building wasn't only about fences and trails. It was about pride, reputation, and who truly held power in the community. By late January, winter winds whipped through the neighborhood, but the cold did nothing to cool tempers. The fight over the woods had become more than a disagreement. It was the heartbeat of every conversation at the mailbox, at school drop-offs, even in the pews at church. For Patricia, this was strategy. Every week she pushed harder, holding informal gatherings at her house where residents sipped coffee and whispered about the Holt problem. She framed Reginald not as a man protecting his rights, but as a divisive force tearing apart the community. And slowly, more people began to see it her way. Reginald noticed the shift. Neighbors he once chatted with about football now turned their backs. Lorraine got polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Caleb stopped walking to school with his friends. They no longer invited him. One evening, Lorraine finally broke. At the dinner table, she put down her fork and said, "Reg, we can't live like this. Every day it's something new. Stares, whispers, vandalism. You've made your point. Maybe it's time to let the trails open again." Reginald stared at her, shocked. "You think giving in will fix this? Patricia will see it as proof she can push us around. And the next time something comes up, she'll do it again." "I think our family's peace matters more than winning," Lorraine shot back. The silence afterward was heavy, broken only by Caleb's voice. "Mom, Dad, what if we tried a compromise? Like, let kids walk the trails certain days or something?" Reginald leaned back, rubbing his face. "Son, compromises only work when both sides want peace. Patricia doesn't. She wants control." The conversation ended there, but the cracks it left lingered. Lorraine's worry deepened, Caleb's frustration grew, and Reginald's resolve hardened further. The final straw came on a Sunday afternoon. Reginald was clearing brush along the property line when he heard shouting. 3 men, Victor Crane and 2 others, were walking the trail openly, ignoring the signs. "Hey!" Reginald called. "You're trespassing!" Victor didn't stop. "This land belongs to everyone. You can't lock us out." "It doesn't belong to everyone," Reginald shot back, striding toward them. "It belongs to me." The second man, younger and hot-tempered, laughed mockingly. "You think you can keep us out forever? Good luck with that." Reginald stopped just a few feet away, his eyes steady. "Turn around, now!" For a moment, the men hesitated. The tension was thick enough to choke. Caleb, who had been helping his father haul branches, stood frozen, wide-eyed. Lorraine rushed out from the porch, shouting, "Reg, please, don't!" Finally, Victor spat on the ground and muttered, "This isn't over." The 3 men stalked off, their footsteps crunching angrily through the dead leaves. Reginald stood there, fists clenched at his sides, chest rising and falling heavily. Lorraine grabbed his arm. "They're trying to provoke you. If you lose your temper, you give them exactly what they want." Reginald exhaled, forcing calm into his voice. I know, but they're going to push until something breaks. That night, Caleb knocked on his father's study door. Dad, he said quietly, I've been thinking. Maybe Mum's right. Maybe fighting like this isn't worth it. Reginald closed the book he'd been pretending to read and looked at his son. You feel like I'm making life harder for you? Caleb shrugged, eyes downcast. Kids at school say you're selfish. Teachers give me looks. I want it to stop. The words pierced deeper than any insult from a neighbor. Reginald leaned forward, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. I hear you. But sometimes the hardest thing about standing up for yourself is that it makes life harder before it makes it better. One day you'll face your own fight. And if you back down too easily, people will think they can walk over you. I don't want that for you. Caleb looked at him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. But even as he reassured his son, doubt gnawed at Reginald. Was he protecting his family's dignity, or sacrificing their peace to prove a point? That doubt only grew stronger when another police cruiser rolled up to his house the next week. The officer stepped out with a clipboard. Mr. Holt, we've had multiple complaints of harassment. People say you've been confronting residents aggressively on the trails. Reginald's jaw tightened. That's a lie. They're trespassing. I've been firm, not aggressive. The officer gave a weary shrug. I'm just here to file the report. After he left, Lorraine said what she'd been holding back for weeks. They're building a case against you, Reg. If Patricia takes this to court, she'll spin you as dangerous, and the more complaints they file, the easier it'll be for a judge to believe her. Reginald paced the living room, fury coursing through him. So I'm supposed to just let them trample over me? Let Patricia dictate the rules? No, Lorraine whispered, tears welling in her eyes. But maybe we need to think about what hill is worth dying on. Her words landed heavy, leaving the room in silence. Reginald stood at the window that night, staring out at the woods. For the first time since this battle began, doubt outweighed anger. He had won the land, but was he losing everything else? But before Reginald could decide his next move, Patricia made hers, and it was bold enough to shake the entire neighborhood to its core. It was early February when Patricia Alden revealed her next move. The Holt family received a thick envelope delivered by certified mail. Lorraine signed for it at the door, her stomach already knotted. She carried it into the kitchen where Reginald sat with his morning coffee. Reg, she said softly, setting the envelope in front of him. It's from an attorney. Reginald opened it slowly. Inside was a letterhead from a local law firm, neatly typed in legal jargon. But the meaning was simple. The HOA, led by Patricia, was filing for an injunction. They claimed the neighborhood had established a prescriptive easement through long-standing use of the trails. In plain words, they were arguing that years of walking, jogging, and biking gave them the right to keep using the land, regardless of ownership. Reginald read it twice, then slid it across the table to Lorraine. She scanned it, her face tightening. They're suing us. Caleb walked in just then, backpack slung over his shoulder. Suing you for what? Reginald forced calm into his voice. For owning what's mine. Caleb looked between his parents, alarmed. Can they even do that? That's what the courts will decide, Reginald muttered. That evening, Patricia held another community meeting at the clubhouse, this time with her attorney present. Reginald attended, though Lorraine begged him not to. You'll only make yourself a target, she warned. But Reginald needed to hear it firsthand. Patricia stood at the front, her attorney, a polished man named Charles Denton, beside her. We have filed an injunction, she announced to the packed room. Our claim is simple. These trails have been used openly by residents for decades. That constitutes a right of access, which Mr. Holt cannot strip away. Applause broke out among her supporters. Reginald felt eyes on him from every angle. When the clapping faded, Charles added, The law is on our side. Judges tend to favor continuity of community use. We believe we have a strong case. Reginald raised his hand. Patricia frowned but gestured reluctantly for him to speak. He stood, his voice clear. For years, this land belonged to one man. No one paid taxes on it but him. No one maintained it but him. And when I bought it legally, that responsibility became mine. The idea that walking your dog on someone else's property gives you ownership rights is absurd. You all know it. Murmurs rippled. Some nodded. Others scowled. Patricia's eyes gleamed. And yet here we are. You've isolated yourself, Mr. Holt. Do you not see how much damage you've done? Reginald met her gaze. Respect is earned by treating people fairly. You fined me for doing something legal. Then you watched others do the same without consequence. You created this conflict, Patricia. Not me. Her smile didn't falter. We'll let the court decide. The meeting ended in chaos. Neighbors shouting, some at Reginald, some at Patricia. Lorraine left with her jaw set tight, Caleb silent at her side. Back home, Reginald sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter again. Lorraine leaned against the counter, arms crossed. We can't afford a drawn-out court battle. Lawyers cost money we don't have. I know, Reginald admitted. But if we let them take this, they'll think they can take anything. Caleb finally spoke. Dad, what if you lose? Reginald looked at his son, his voice steady. Then we lose standing tall, not crawling. The days that followed were heavy with preparation. Reginald contacted an attorney of his own, a sharp, pragmatic woman named Andrea Collins. She met him in her small office downtown, papers stacked in neat piles. They're banking on prescriptive easement, Andrea explained. It's tricky. Courts sometimes side with communities if use has been uninterrupted for a long time, but they'll need to prove continuous access and your predecessor's permission, or neglect. Arthur never gave permission, Reginald said firmly. He always said it was private. Then we'll bring him in to testify. Andrea nodded. It won't be easy, but you have a case. When Reginald told Lorraine, she looked torn. I want to believe this ends well, but Patricia has the whole neighborhood behind her. It's not just about law. It's about pressure. Reginald touched her hand gently. I've faced pressure before. We'll get through it. But pressure had a way of seeping into every crack. One afternoon, Reginald came home to find Caleb sitting on the porch steps, staring at the ground. What's wrong? Reginald asked. Caleb's voice was quiet. A kid at school said his mum told him I'm the reason the neighborhood is falling apart. That we're selfish. I didn't even know what to say. Reginald sat beside him. You don't owe anyone an explanation, son. Sometimes people hate you not for what you did, but because you didn't bow to them. Remember that. Caleb swallowed hard. But it feels like everyone's against us. Reginald placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we stand together. That's enough. That night, as wind rattled the windows, Reginald lay awake staring at the ceiling. Patricia had turned neighbors into enemies, turned peace into war. Now she was turning law into a weapon. But battles fought in courtrooms can be more brutal than those fought in fields, and Reginald was about to learn just how far Patricia was willing to go. The official court date was still weeks away, but the trial had already begun in living rooms, grocery aisles, and online groups. The neighborhood Facebook page turned into a battlefield, each post and comment sharpening the divide. Patricia knew how to wield words like knives. She wrote long, carefully crafted updates painting herself as the voice of reason, and Reginald as a stubborn agitator. Reginald rarely responded. He believed silence was strength, but silence also left room for rumor. Caleb showed him one post late one night, his face tense. Dad, listen to this, he said, reading aloud. Mr. Holt pretends to care about fairness, but he bought the land just to punish the community. People like that don't belong in neighborhoods built on trust. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he set the phone down. They're calling us outsiders, Dad. Reginald's jaw tightened, but he forced his voice steady. Outsiders don't buy homes here. Outsiders don't pay the same dues. Don't ever forget. We belong just as much as anyone. Lorraine, sitting nearby, let out a weary sigh. Words spread faster than truth, Reg. Patricia knows that. She's poisoning minds before we even step into court. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Then we make sure when the time comes, the truth hits harder than the lies. But Patricia wasn't finished. She began organizing community walks, groups of neighbors parading down the street with signs that read, "Reopen the trails," and "Our land, our right." They didn't step onto Reginald's property, but the message was clear. They wanted him gone, or at least broken. One Saturday afternoon, Reginald watched from his porch as a cluster of families marched by. Children carried poster boards, scrawled with markers. Parents waved at passing cars to draw attention. Lorraine stood beside him, arms crossed tightly. "They're turning this into a spectacle," she whispered. Reginald's voice was low. "That's all it is to them. A show. But they don't realize this isn't theater for me. It's life." Caleb, standing on the porch steps, muttered bitterly. "Feels like they'd rather burn the neighborhood down than admit they're wrong." That night, Reginald received a phone call from Arthur Macmillan. The old man's voice was gravelly but steady. "Heard about your circus down there. You holding up?" "I'm standing," Reginald replied. Arthur chuckled softly. "Good. Just remember, mobs are loud because they're scared. They know deep down they don't have the law on their side." Arthur's reassurance helped, but the weight never lifted. The Holt house became a fortress of tension. Lorraine triple-checked the locks at night. Caleb stopped answering texts from old friends. Reginald himself began sleeping lighter, ears tuned for the crunch of tires or the crack of branches outside. Then came the knock. It was late evening when Patricia herself appeared at their door again. Lorraine hesitated before opening it, but Patricia's smile was polite, almost warm. "I came to extend an olive branch," she said sweetly. Reginald appeared behind Lorraine, folding his arms. "Funny, your olive branch comes after spray paint and petitions." Patricia's smile didn't falter. "I don't control every action in this neighborhood, Mr. Holt, but I do control the tone. And I'd prefer if this didn't drag on. If you reopen the trails voluntarily, we can withdraw the suit. Think about it. No court costs, no public fight. You'd even regain some goodwill." Lorraine looked at her husband, eyes pleading, but Reginald's face stayed stone. "Respect isn't something I rent out for goodwill, Patricia. If you wanted peace, you'd have started with fairness." Patricia's smile sharpened into something colder. "Then we'll see you in court." She turned and walked away, heels clicking against the pavement. After the door shut, Lorraine spoke softly. "She gave you a chance to end this." Reginald turned to her. "She gave me a chance to surrender. That's not the same thing." The weeks crawled by, the tension stretching thinner but never snapping. Every letter from Andrea Collins, his attorney, carried both hope and dread. Every phone call from neighbors who quietly supported him reminded Reginald he wasn't entirely alone. But their whispers never matched Patricia's megaphone. On the night before the hearing, Reginald sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed. The deed lay in front of him, along with a copy of the fine that started it all. He traced his finger over Patricia's signature, the spark that lit the fire. "This isn't just about land," he murmured to himself. "It's about respect. And if I lose tomorrow, at least they'll know I didn't bow." Caleb's voice startled him from the doorway. "Dad? You're still up?" Reginald smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep." Caleb walked over and sat beside him. "Whatever happens, I'm glad you didn't give in. You taught me something, even if it's been hard." Reginald looked at his son, pride and sorrow mingling. "That means more than anything." The clock ticked past midnight. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new chapter. One written not in whispers or signs, but in testimony and judgment. But as Reginald walked into that courthouse the next morning, he would realize that battles in front of a judge don't just test your case, they test your character. The courthouse in downtown Chattanooga was an imposing brick building with tall columns and wide stone steps. On the morning of the hearing, Reginald stood at the base of those steps with Lorraine and Caleb by his side. His attorney, Andrea Collins, joined them, carrying a slim leather briefcase. "You ready?" she asked quietly. Reginald straightened his shoulders. "Been ready since the day they sent that letter." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Patricia sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, Charles Denton, and a cluster of supporters filling the benches behind her. Reginald and Andrea took their seats on the opposite side, with Lorraine and Caleb just a few feet away in the gallery. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Marlene Foster, entered, and the room fell silent. The bailiff called the session to order, and the case began. Charles Denton rose first, his tone polished, words flowing like practiced theater. He painted a picture of a community betrayed, children robbed of joy, families cut off from a cherished tradition. Your Honor, for decades these trails were the lifeblood of this neighborhood. Generations grew up with them. Mr. Holt's sudden closure has caused division, hostility, and harm. We argue that long-standing use has established a prescriptive easement. These trails are not merely his property, they are our heritage. Soft applause rose from Patricia's supporters before the judge slammed her gavel. This is a courtroom, not a rally. Andrea stood next, her voice crisp. Your Honor, what Mr. Denton leaves out is the law. Ownership is not overridden by habit. The trails were never deeded to the HOA, never opened formally to the public, and never taxed by anyone but the owner. My client purchased this land legally. He maintains it, he secures it, and he has every right to decide how it is used. To strip him of that right would be to punish him for nothing more than exercising ownership. Reginald watched Patricia's face as Andrea spoke. The HOA president's expression was calm, but her eyes flickered with irritation. The hearing stretched into testimony. Victor Crane spoke first for the HOA, describing how he'd jogged the trails for 20 years. It was always understood we could use them. No one stopped us. Andrea cross-examined. Did you ever receive written permission? Victor shifted. No, but it was common practice. Did you pay for maintenance? No. Did you pay property taxes on the land? Victor frowned. Of course not. Andrea let the silence hang, then nodded. No further questions. Arthur Macmillan testified next. His voice carried the weight of age and experience. That land was mine for over 50 years. I told folks plenty of times it wasn't theirs to use. They walked it anyway. But I never gave permission. And when Reginald came to me, I sold it to him fair and square. It's his now. The judge listened intently, jotting notes. Finally, Reginald himself took the stand. Andrea asked him to describe why he bought the land. His voice was steady, deliberate. I didn't buy it to punish anyone. I bought it because I was fined for doing something legal, something I love, hunting with my son. I wanted security. I wanted fairness. And I wanted to make sure no one could take that away again. The land gave me that. Andrea nodded. And how do you feel about the community's anger toward you? Reginald looked directly at Patricia. I understand why they're upset. But respect goes both ways. When I was fined unfairly, no one stood up for me. When I protected myself, suddenly everyone had an opinion. I don't regret buying the land. I regret that fairness was never given a chance. Charles Denton rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp. Mr. Holt, do you deny that your decision has divided the neighborhood? I don't deny it, Reginald said evenly. But truth has a way of dividing people, those who value it and those who don't. A ripple moved through the courtroom. After closing arguments, Judge Foster called a brief recess. The room buzzed with speculation. Lorraine squeezed Reginald's hand, her knuckles white. Caleb sat stiffly, eyes locked on the judge's bench. When the judge returned, the room fell silent. She spoke clearly, each word carrying weight. This case hinges on whether the community has established a legal easement through long-standing use. The evidence shows that while residents walked the trails for many years, there was never formal permission, never tax contribution, and consistent statements by the prior owner that the land was private. Therefore, no prescriptive easement exists. The property belongs exclusively to Mr. Holt. The injunction is denied. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Patricia's face froze, her polished composure cracking just slightly. Reginald closed his eyes, relief washing over him. Judge Foster continued, her voice firm. That said, I urge both parties to reflect. This conflict has cost more than legal fees. It has cost trust, community, and peace. Ownership grants rights, but leadership requires wisdom. I encourage dialogue moving forward. The gavel struck. The case was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters and curious neighbors hovered. Patricia slipped away quickly, avoiding questions. Reginald stood with Lorraine and Caleb, a small crowd watching. What now, Dad? Caleb asked softly. Reginald looked out at the city streets, then back at his son. Now we live. We hold our heads high, and we keep doing what's right. Because respect isn't about winning in court, it's about standing firm when it matters. Lorraine leaned into him, her voice gentle. It's finally over. Reginald shook his head slightly. The fight's never over. Not really. But we showed them something today. We showed them we won't be pushed. He turned back to Caleb, his voice carrying a lesson he hoped would last a lifetime. Remember this, son. Peace is worth fighting for, but only when it doesn't cost your dignity. Never trade one for the other. They walked down the courthouse steps together, side by side, the weight of the past months heavy, but no longer crushing. The battle had scarred them, yes, but it had also strengthened the bond of family, principle, and resolve. And for anyone watching, the message was unmistakable. Respect cuts both ways, and those who forget it often end up learning the hardest lessons. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the battles we face every day and the lessons they leave behind.